Hello, everyone, everywhere. Welcome to this edition of the Two World Podcast. My name is Ken, and before we get to our very special guest today, I would very much like to introduce our two co-hosts. We have a person who lives in Japan, and he
I
is...
am Barney.
Thank you, Barney. And sharing Ohio with me, we have...
I am Jacob.
All right. And we are very excited today to share the screen and share our time with a person I've known for a little while. I can't say that I know her better than her husband because I've known her husband since he was a teenager, which has just been a rich journey with her husband, Wes, and his family as well. But before I formally introduce Lauren, I'd like to tell a little bit about her. Lauren is a gifted American painter. Educationally, she received a master's from the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. She uses a uniquely limited palette with selective detail, supporting her distinct vision. And as you will see from the slides that we share, it's a very, very impressive vision. She's gotten grants, particularly from the Elizabeth Green Shields Foundation. She is an award winner with the NTD International Salon and the Art Renewal Center. Her painting, there are collections at the Art Renewal Center and the Rockwell Museum in Corning, New York. She lives and works uniquely in rural West Virginia, quite often, understandably, using the landscapes that surround her as backdrops for her painting. We know you will be impressed, and we're so excited to introduce to you, to our program, Lauren Tilden. Welcome, Lauren.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you so much. That's a great introduction.
Oh, okay. I told you a little bit about the background. I'm going to tell you a little bit about her living situation, and then maybe she can elaborate on that a bit before we get into what her art is about. Lauren, I believe you are originally from New Jersey, as well as, I know Wes and family lived there for quite some time as well. And at some point, about 5 years ago, they relocated to West Virginia, but I'm not talking about just Wes and Lauren. Lauren, you want to tell about a little bit about the relocation to West Virginia?
Yes, sure. It was quite an upheaval, I would say. We had three families. I grew up in New Jersey, spent my entire life there, and we decided that we loved rural living. We loved farming. Wes has a passion for raising animals, and we decided we were going to find some land. It was very difficult to do in New Jersey, as you can imagine. So we started looking outside of New Jersey, and I had never once driven through the state of West Virginia. I've been many places, but never to West Virginia, knew nothing about it. So three families, we go on a road trip looking for a location, and we couldn't find a thing. We went to Tennessee, South Carolina, North Carolina. And on our way home, we just happened to stop in West Virginia at this property that had three houses on it and loved it. Like, the property had a creek running through it, mountains, fields. And every person we met here was so kind and nice. So we were like, this is it. We're gonna all relocate to West Virginia. It was my brother-in-law and his family, my father-in-law, who had recently retired, and my husband and I. So the only hitch was that of the three houses, only one was livable. The other two were in need of major renovations. So it was a huge project, getting three families from New Jersey to West Virginia, renovating these houses. We started with my in-laws' house because it was a smaller house, and theirs is pretty much finished, and we are still working on are Wes and my house, which is the original old farmhouse on the property. When we moved here, there were, I believe, horses living in this house. So it was in very bad condition, shockingly bad. It has fabulous bones and structure, but I had no idea what I was thinking taking on this project. But we'll be glad when it's finished. So
Wow. Well, horses are notoriously sloppy house people.
yes, they were pretty bad. Um,
Goodness.
yeah, but it's we finally have the house closed in. We have the poplar siding painted a very cheerful yellow. So it's coming along. And then in the meantime, we decided to take on a bunch of farm animals. So that was, I was like, I'm not sure. We might be a little crazy, like house renovation, first time milking a cow, chickens. So it's
Wow.
it's it's been an adventure.
Wow. When Lauren signed on, they have 2 daughters. They're out milking the cows. I mean, a very different way to live.
It is. It
That's
is.
amazing.
It is. I never, if you had asked me 10 years ago, I never would have imagined myself in West Virginia with the milk cow, chickens, pigs, living this lifestyle, but I love it. It's hard work and it makes me, just have a whole different perspective on life. I'm seeing where our food comes from, how hard it is to grow the food and care for it. It makes you just appreciate things a little differently and you have to slow down, in so it's been fun.
I'm really curious, kind of. It feels like we picked up the story near the beginning, but not fully at the beginning. I'm just so curious, what was the impetus for the decision to leave New Jersey and then leave as a group, and then also leave with the intention of, really connecting with nature and getting, having this more simple lifestyle?
Yeah. Well, I guess when we were in New Jersey, my husband and I had one goat and we had I believe it was an acre of land and we loved it. We were like, we thought we were in the country. I, because I grew up in in a suburb town of New Jersey and then we moved 15 minutes away, which I thought was, the country. And then I realized it really wasn't once I got to West Virginia. But we realized we loved that type of living. And then all our trips to Vermont on vacation, every time I would go to Vermont and I would drive back to New Jersey. New Jersey's wonderful, but my in my heart, I was thinking, "Oh, why am I living here? Like, I want to be in Vermont." That was my thought.
Mm-hmm.
So originally, my husband and I just had this idea that someday we want to move out to the country. We wanted that lifestyle for our children. We didn't know if it was ever going to happen, but it came to the point where my husband, he actually retired from his job and started his own business, which he was remote. My brother-in-law also moved to a remote job during COVID. And my father-in-law retired from his job as a pastor in the Methodist church. And at that point, he said, we're going to buy a home and you all need to decide, are you going to stay in New Jersey? We'll buy a home with you. If not, we're going to come with you wherever you go. So that was kind of like, we need to make a decision. I actually wanted to move to Maine or Vermont. That was my first choice. But my father in law is from Massachusetts and he was done with cold winters. He said, that's it. He said, no, we have to go south. So that was kind of the reason for moving, like looking in the southern direction. And we also wanted to be within driving distance of my family, which is, everyone's in New Jersey still. So we were looking mostly in Tennessee. We thought we would end up in Tennessee. But then when we drove through West Virginia, we just fell in love with it. And it worked that everyone either retired or was working remotely at the same time. And surprisingly, they all were wanting to go, which was unusual, very
Mhm.
unusual.
Mhm. Barney, just to take your great question back even a little further, I met Lauren's father-in-law and mother-in-law, Jeff and Sandy, when we were camping in Vermont with my family. We'd go to the same state park every year, and after meeting these folks and a few others, it's a very small state park in Vermont, and we would plan to overlap as much as we could. It doesn't always work. And boy, just great times, just great times. And Wes gets older, obviously, and his brother and my daughter, they all get older, and then we're blessed with meeting Lauren, and it's just yeah, it's fun. It almost feels like right now we should be doing two podcasts. The story of Lauren,
Right?
history wise, and then the
The
paintings.
baby.
Yeah, those are I don't think I may have gone twice to Vermont with you. I know you went with Wes and his family since what, were they like 12 or 13 when you started going?
Sounds about right.
Right. So you had many, many fun adventures and years with them. And then the couple years I was there, I just loved it. And I'm still sad that, we are not going. I almost want to have a reunion in Vermont of, camping. I think we kind of stopped when
Mm,
the new babies came.
sure.
Yeah, which I understand. After I had my first, I was like, I can't camp with the baby. Some people do, but yeah. So, yeah, those were great times.
I would love to ask about how living in close proximity with other family members shapes your rhythm of life and how that maybe spills over into your artistic work. Do you notice, has there been a change as you move to a more rural environment and maybe this, like as you described, a slower pace of life set in that translated into a different way of doing art? And then has living in such close proximity with other family members in this rural environment, has that also shaped how you think about doing your art as well?
Yeah. So the close proximity, I would say, has been more of a benefit and wonderful for my children. To have like grandma and grandpa like right down the road and their aunt next door and cousins right across the street. That's been wonderful. Just I think it's great to have that experience if you can. Surprisingly enough, like that's how I grew up in New Jersey, even though it wasn't a rural environment. My grandmother was like around the block and my cousins were down the street. And then everyone was, out playing on the street all day, which I loved. And I'm kind of sad that that's not doesn't seem like the experience for most kids anymore, where kids can be outside playing. But at least here in West Virginia, that's still how it is. So the kids are all outside all day and they're running up and down, between the different properties playing, which is wonderful. In terms of the slower pace of life, that was a bit of an adjustment to me. I think in New Jersey, we do have a faster, way of dealing with everything, going to the grocery store, driving, talking. So coming here, I did not realize how stressed I was, if that's the best way, how, how quickly I talked and, so it was great to, be aware of that, to slow down. Here I will have neighbors that will stop by, you know, and just talk all for as long as they want. They'll come in the house, you know. It's kind of, how you imagine things were if you step back in time. And
Mm,
I think it's wonderful. And in terms of the art, I was very nervous about moving to West Virginia in terms of what is the art culture going to be like? I'm moving away from New York, Philadelphia. Am I going to be so removed from the art world that, that's kind of could be the end of my career? But I was extremely surprised to find that in West Virginia, there's such an appreciation for the arts. I've actually had more demand for my work since I moved here, and I've been significantly busier that I actually can't even keep up with it. So Yeah, so that was surprising, and it could be, like you said, like, I'm near Lewisburg, so we do have Carnegie Hall. It seems like there's a really strong music culture here, and it that also leads into painting and visual arts, and people appreciate it. The Greenbrier, which I don't know if you're familiar with that, that's nearby. So I do have a bunch of paintings over in a gallery, the Gibson Gallery at the Greenbrier, and they are always wanting more paintings, which I'm trying to get done because between the milk cow and the house renovations, and yeah, I'm finding it hard to keep up with. But that's a good problem
Mhm.
uh, to have. So yeah, and I think West Virginia, like I said, Carnegie Hall surprised me. The level of musical excellence here surprised me. I was just at an event they have at Carnegie Hall that my daughter played in for high schoolers to showcase whatever instruments they play. And between the violin players and the piano players and the vocalist, it was incredible. Just the level of talent and ability. I was blown away. So it's been wonderful living here, the art culture. You wouldn't expect it, but I guess until you move to a place, you really have no idea. And we have these notions and stereotypes, and then you move in and you're like, wow, I was very wrong, and I don't know as much as I think I do. So, and you might understand that living in Japan, just the differences and your experience there.
Completely true. Yeah, because you probably a very similar situation where you kind of work up in your mind what it would be like, and then you get there, and all of these things that you notice surprise you because it doesn't fit with what you had thought. And then, but probably same similar with you. Slowly but surely, you uncovered the more subtleties of the area, and you see things that you can appreciate in a whole different scale. And some things do match with what you had anticipated, but then the things that surprise you are what make it worth staying. You mentioned that when you found this area that you just fell in love for one thing, for the beauty. And I know that Jacob has a few photos and slides lined up of some of your work, but the first one is a photo of you painting. And I'm curious, is this on your property?
This is my neighbor's property, who is right up the mountain from us. His last name is Gore, and he has a gorgeous property on the top of the mountain, and he is very welcoming to us. Come up and spend time on his property, paint on his property. The girls have ridden their horses up on his property several times. So, yeah. So this is near where we live.
Mhm. So was this painting done after a picture was taken? Is this painting done from it's in your head?
Uh,
Talk a little bit about the process.
sure, all of the above. So, yes. So I prefer to paint from life if I can. I think with the photograph, unless you're a fantastic photographer, which I am not, it's easy to distort the figure and the proportions and the colors. Especially, I know right now everyone's snapping photos with their iPhones, and those photos drive me crazy because if I try to paint one from a photo I quickly snap, the contrast is off, the colors are off, the perspective is distorted. So I first prefer to draw or paint from life. However, most of my models are my family members. So I'm not paying a professional model to sit for me, for I don't know, 20 to 50 hours, which is what it would probably require. I'm using people I know, friends, family, children. At this point, my girls are, teenagers, and they can probably sit for like 2 hours at a time, and they're willing to help out. So I will draw or sketch, do a quick drawing or sketch from life, try to figure out colors, and then take a bunch of photos. And use both in the studio plus my imagination. So I do find with all of those things, like if I am painting from a photo, there's a lot that I have to remember or imagine or correct. So somehow bringing all three together seems to work at this point. I would love to spend even more time just drawing or painting from life. And perhaps that'll happen in the future, but I'm also an extremely slow painter. So the amount of time that would require of someone would be a bit much. And if I'm putting someone in a landscape setting, like in this photo, the light changes so quickly. You don't have much time. So that's why it's kind of helpful to have all three.
Mm.
I love seeing this picture because I think it kind of gives us a little insight into how you paint and what you paint. I think before we look at some of your other works that we have lined up, could you kind of talk a little bit about maybe about your inspiration, but also specifically in this picture, like the nature that we see in the photo is so beautiful, but you elect not to include all of it in the painting itself, it seems at this point. And
Yeah.
I'm curious about the inspiration behind that and like your vision that you put into some of your paintings of how you have some images that are so photorealistic almost, but then not all of the painting itself is that detailed. I'm curious
Yeah,
about how you approach it that way.
sure. Yeah, that's kind of a selective process in terms of what am I trying to emphasize in the painting. If everything were equally vibrant or detailed, it would almost be overwhelming to the viewer. So for in this painting, you mentioned that the landscape is pretty subdued compared to what's actually there. And that was a choice because the figure is so prominent. So I wanted the focus to be primarily on the figure with giving areas of like rest and almost calmness in the rest of the painting. Now, if the landscape is the primary focus of the painting, like I think there's a few others that I have, then that changes things where I will focus more on the details of the landscape or areas of vibrant color versus more subdued color. So it's a choice based on, I'd say, what I want to communicate. So I know, similar to music, there'll be areas of crescendo and then areas of quiet. I'm not really familiar with all the musical terms, but you know different dynamics to a song, and that's kind of what I'm also trying to create in the painting.
I would like to ask also, when painting a person, what are you trying to capture beyond their likeness?
Mm.
Mm, yes. So I am really trying to capture their spirit or their soul, who they are. I would say if you're familiar with Rembrandt's portraits, that has been a big inspiration. If you look at his portraits, there's a spark of life in those eyes, and you can almost see who is this person. There's a painting I have. I don't know if you have the slide. It's of Dinah.
Yes.
I'm
Let
gonna
me
pull
go
that one
ahead
up.
here.
Yep, there you go. So this is one of my good friends from New Jersey, and I did a couple paintings of her, and every single one I was very happy with because there was something about who she is as a person, an inner strength, an inner peace, but also this very, I don't know, vivaciousness that she has about her that I was trying to capture in the paintings. So that was really a goal with all the different paintings I did of her over the years. I wish she was in West Virginia because I would
Mhm.
have her come over and do a few more paintings of her. But yeah, that's really what I'm seeking. Like, who is this person that God created? I love portraiture because I think it's an opportunity to explore, how we were created in God's image, how we're special and unique, giving value back to the human being. So that's kind of what I'm trying to do with all my different paintings of
Mm.
of people.
Yeah, you certainly, and in particular, this face given us cause to think about what she's pondering and what was her life about that particular time in her life, and the subdued background virtually forces us to think thoughts like that. Lauren, you mentioned, her spirit, her soul, and how God created us. I'm sure you find that your spiritual life is a big part of what you do and how you do painting and life. Do you wanna address that a little bit? Is there another slide that of the
Yeah,
choices that we could bring up and
sure. Let's see. Do you have the one? It's called Jairus's daughter.
Okay, let me see here. If you just tell me when I get to it.
Sure. Yeah. I think it's more. Yep, that one.
This
Okay.
one. Okay.
Yep. There you go. Yeah. So I would say that my faith in God is probably the biggest reason I paint. It's like the purpose behind it. And as an artist, and also now that we are into regenerative farming, which is interesting, I feel like the two are similar. I look out at this world and whenever I have doubts, like, is God really there? Or is this just yeah, is it too good to be true? I look out at this created world and looking at the grass and the flowers and the sun and the clouds, and I think it's impossible to be an atheist. Like, this is just too fantastic. When you start examining it all, like how, our environment is perfectly suited to us, even the frequency of the earth is like healing to us. It's incredible. And it does strengthen my faith. And then, as an artist, I'm trying to reflect, that glory and beauty, whether it is painting a human being or a landscape. So and with farming, with regenerative farming, as you start working with the land and the animals and you're creating this, environment where plants flourish and animals flourish because you know, they're kind of working the way God intended them to. You know, the chickens are scratching the dirt and pecking the worms, and then the pigs are rooting and the cows are fertilizing, and then you get this beautiful grass that comes up and feeds the cows again. It's really amazing, and it's a marvelous thing. So, yeah, so that's kind of what I'm trying to capture in the paintings, although as an artist, you always fall short. You can't even come close to what we see in the real world. But this particular painting was probably the first and so far the only specific biblical story that I painted. So this is the story of Jairus's daughter. And my husband Wes actually encouraged me to do a biblical narrative. I was very hesitant to do so because I didn't want it to be kitsch or like simplistic. These stories have so much weight to them. And I was nervous about not being able to capture that. But I decided to give it a try. And I haven't I haven't done another one since, probably for that same reason. Just not having the time that I would want to devote to it. But this one is the moment before Christ enters the room and raises the daughter back to life. So we have the daughter, the father who is grieving, and this ray of light that is, diagonally entering the room, which is representing Christ as he's about to enter. Perhaps he's opening the door. And that was inspired by the artist Caravaggio, who would always use a diagonal light to kind of direct the viewer and to symbolize the Christ or the light of God in his paintings. So this painting I did, and it ended up being unique in the public reaction to it. I was very surprised. I had met several people who they looked at the painting and they would just start crying. I haven't had that with another painting, I had a woman at a show who said to me, my husband passed away. I forget if she said it was a year ago or 2 years ago, but her husband had passed away. She was struggling through the grief. She didn't know how to deal with it, and she said, "I looked at this painting," and she said, "Suddenly, it was okay." Like, she had peace. And to me, that was probably one of the most meaningful moments in my art career, just to know what an impact, like, a painting or a visual image could have on a person in that way of healing. So, yeah, so in that sense, yes, my faith plays a huge role. I'm hoping and praying that God will use my work, for his glory and for the good of others.
Well,
That's really inspiring. Thank you for sharing that.
yeah.
Is there a way in which the actual process of producing the art connects with your spirituality? Are there prayerful moments or silent moments, or as you're doing certain actions, do you sense a closeness of God in the
Mhm.
process itself?
Yes, absolutely. Now, not all the time because, I will admit that there are days where right now my studio is in my living room because we're renovating this house. And between the kids and all the activities, there's many times where it's not very, it's a little chaotic. However, the wonderful moments are when you kind of get into this flow and you kind of forget everything around you and you're just, calm and you're working at your craft. And I would say at those moments, I would say I feel the presence of God. And it is a very peaceful thing. And, I am praying that God will help me with my work and will give me the ability to do this. I often think about who is it Bezalel in Exodus, who
Is it
God is
the
am I
making of the tabernacle? Is that
yes,
yes. The
yes,
gifted the Spirit, Holy Spirit gifts them with the capacity to make the artistic, yeah, decorative elements of the tabernacle. Right. Yeah,
exactly.
a whole yes, is it Holiab and Bezalel? Yeah, the names are hard to say, but I know what you're talking about.
Yes, thank you. I didn't wanna pronounce the names, but yes, I think about that and you know, how magnificent and incredible it is that it is the spirit of God that enables the artist to do the work, so that is something I'm praying for, that my work will, be through God's spirit. And yeah, and that's kind of while I'm working, I am praying for that. So yes, and that's an inspiring story for me as an artist.
Lauren, we've in our time on these broadcasts, we've interviewed several writers, several authors, and we will typically ask them, what's a typical day like for you? Now, with a writer, they could write any time of day.
Mm.
And several of them are very ritualistic that bang, 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 bang. And I write every single day. Has to be much different for you. Are there days where you go, I can't paint today,
Mm. Mhm.
I-
Mhm.
or
Mhm.
life is in the way, or how does that feel for you?
Absolutely. I would love to have a schedule and a ritual. At this point, I'm keeping my expectations a little low. I think for any craft, writing or painting, it is ideal to have a regular, schedule and a regular practice because even like a runner or like a sport, you need to keep practicing what you're doing. So in this current season of my life, I don't have that, and that's okay, because I am, dealing with the farm. I'm homeschooling my children as well, so that's kind of a big priority right now. So I would say that I typically will paint in the afternoon or in the evening if I have the time. It's definitely not as much as I would like. I try to get together once a week with other artists over in Lewisburg. One of the artists has a studio and we'll all gather and paint together. And that's a wonderful time. It kind of gets my mind focused again on the work. So, yeah, but I understand what you say about writers. My sister's actually a writer, and she's very regimented. She's up, you know, 6 a.m. and writing right away at her desk writing. So, yeah, I'm not exactly that disciplined. So,
What's your sister's genre is if she can be
um,
defined?
she does mostly playwriting. So, yeah, and I think she's starting to get into some shorter stories now. But
Uh,
yeah,
Very cool.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So, but yeah, if I think that I know, so I realized I have about 3 more years before my children are, you know, done with their high school years, and at that point, I'll probably have much more time on my hands, and I'll probably have a better schedule with painting.
I I would think it would be absolutely fascinating, like in 3 years or sooner, to have your 2 daughters on this program and to talk to them about what growing up was like, which is so far away from the way the 3 of us grew up. The 4 of us grew up. Eh, yeah, it would just be interesting to have their viewpoint. Because
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm curious, you mentioned how you don't have enough time, as much as you wish you did have, on a daily basis. And earlier you mentioned that you have a number of orders that are still waiting to be, delivered, I guess. How does that work for you? Does the client, do they say, "I want a picture of this," or do they say like something more general, like, I'm looking for this kind of theme, and then they just let you produce what you want?
It's sometimes I would say on average, it's more general. I've had a few specific commissions where, someone wants a portrait of their grandchildren or their wife. However, the majority of my collectors will say, I want a landscape of West Virginia.
Mm.
Once you get one done, send me the image or, and then I'll send them the image and they will either like it, dislike it, wait for the next one. I have one lady who loves my portraits, but not anyone that she not as portrait of her family, just like one like any of my portraits. So when I get those finished, I'll send her an image. And then the galleries, I mostly work through the galleries. So they will request, a certain number of paintings a year that, and as they sell work, they'll want more work. So the gallery at the Greenbrier, they there's a famous spring house at the Greenbrier that they wanted me to paint, so I painted that. That just sold. They want another painting of the spring house.
Mhm.
So it's kind of like that, but mostly it's left up to my own ideas and discretion what I'm going
Mhm.
to paint.
Mhm.
Okay.
Mhm.
And
Mm.
it's just yeah, West Virginia has surprised me because like I said, there's a few different galleries here and they've sold quite a bit of my work and it's just hard to keep up with it at this point.
Wow. It might be appropriate at this time, and she did not ask us to do this. I don't know if that's visible. Is it backwards?
It's
No, it's
looking great.
coming. It's coming through,
Okay.
Ken.
There's the website, and you can look at her portfolio as well as anything you might be interested in purchasing. It sure is fun to go there and look at some more.
Mhm.
Lauren, are there any of the other slides that you wanted to highlight as we kinda went through those, or is our
Um,
time nearing its end?
Mhm.
yeah, let's see. There's a mother and child, I guess we could look at.
Okay. Is that it?
No,
Let me see. I'll go back this way. I'm sorry.
that
Is
one
that
right there. So this was an earlier painting I did in New Jersey, and this was inspired by like a Madonna and child. So in this painting, I was interested in again how the landscape will reflect the mood or give more information to the viewer, as well as a circular composition with the figures to keep the eye moving. So that was one of my, I'd say, more favorite paintings that I've done.
Lauren, can I ask a quick question before we go on?
Sure.
Ken used the term earlier when he was introducing you, limited palette.
Mhm.
And can you just talk, I mean, maybe if this painting would be a good example about how does this limitation free you to, in a way that a broader palette wouldn't, or is there
Mm.
something you might say about that kind of approach or technique with painting?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. So I do prefer, or I have preferred in the past, a limited palette, which is basically you're using mostly earth pigments and you're limiting that to a black, a burnt sienna, like a reddish color, a yellow ochre, and a white. Okay. So that is how I would typically start my paintings. And amazingly, with those colors, you can achieve a wide range of, blues and reds and warms and cool tones. I growing up in New Jersey, we were near Brandywine, which is where Andrew Wyeth worked and lived. And that was hugely inspirational to me throughout my childhood. So I think I've always been inspired by his work, as this painting does reflect. Now, since moving to West Virginia, I think the environment has changed my palette a bit,
Mm.
which is interesting. So, in New Jersey, you would have more of these, South Jersey in particular, these flatter, like grayer landscapes. But since I'm in West Virginia now, everything is so green. And I believe that's because of the limestone. The grass is intensely green here. And if you switch ahead, I have that landscape from West Virginia. It's the lawn
Mm.
with the mountains. I mean, all of a sudden, I'm seeing such a difference in my palette choice because now I'm having these vibrant greens that are showing up. I don't know, what that's gonna look like in the as I move forward, but I do see that, you know, living here is beginning to change, color choices, even choices of the themes of the paintings. I have,
Mm.
a few ideas in my head of just things I'm experiencing here, that involve, horses and cows, which I've never incorporated into any of my paintings before. I think there's another painting of a girl with holding a chicken, if you wanna skip ahead to that
Sure.
one. So, yeah, I mean, even as you're flipping through, I'm just seeing such a change in the color from some of the previous paintings to this one, which has a lot of these vibrant, not completely, but we've got some bright greens and the bright red. So this is probably one of the more recent paintings I've done in West Virginia of my daughter. And again, it's a slightly different theme that we're having, a more, the rural lifestyle, the farm, the animals. So yeah, so that's an excellent question because, I prefer a limited palette. I think it keeps my paintings organized. You avoid, garish colors. But then as I've been in West Virginia, I'm starting to incorporate some of these more vibrant colors in the outdoors.
There's something about that I love, the locatedness of an artist. It's like the local environment changes your palette. That's really inspiring to me that you can live in a different place and it would affect you on such a fundamental level as an artist. That's really,
Yeah,
really interesting.
it is. And if you look at different artists throughout the United States, I mean, this is a fabulous area to observe that because we have so many different environments in our country. As you move out west, there's a lot of artists, painting Western art in Arizona or Texas. Their palette is completely different. They've got these beautiful like pinks and oranges and which I'm not seeing here. So it's that is interesting, moving from the East Coast, it's a little more
Mm.
gray and subdued. And then now I'm in the greens. And then if I were to live out west, I might get some of those beautiful pinks and oranges.
Mm. Lauren, if in an ideal situation, as as your daughter's age, etc. Given your love of Vermont and mine, if you were to go back and Wes said, "I'll see you in 6 months," where would you go to paint? What might you paint? Has it crossed your mind at all?
Mhm.
Oh, yes. Well, I'd have to go back to Lake Dunmore to paint, and I would probably just get a little cottage on the lake if that were possible, and just spend my time painting that lake, and then also some of the waterfalls that are near there. I forget, was it the Falls of Lana?
Lana. Mhm.
Yes. Hiking up in that direction up to Silver Lake. I would probably head to Silver Lake. That is beautiful up there. Some of the views
And
and
isolated, yes.
yes, isolated, the wildflowers. But I like that idea. I like your idea. I'm gonna tell Wes, drop me off in Vermont for a month.
Yeah.
Give me my the paints and a good book, and then I'll be happy.
There you go. There you go. Yeah.
Yep.
Are there any other questions or comments that any of us would like to make before we close this episode?
I just wanted to mention, and it was in the comments we sent to you, Lauren. We're very blessed not only by having Jacob as our pastor in our Mennonite church. He uses paintings often to get the congregation thinking about, the story message of the day in the sermon, and it's so effective because people pay attention. And Lauren, I don't know what your experience may or may not be with Mennonite churches. Ours is one where the microphone's always going around. Jacob will say, "Well, what are you seeing here? What are you thinking here? How does this apply?" And our small church, people are very willing to take that microphone and without any fear of risk that it might not be what others are seeing, tell what they see in a painting. And I would think you would be interested and have been
Mm.
interested when you look at people and they tell you what they see within
Mm.
yours, kinda like we're doing today a bit. Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, that is so fascinating. I am not familiar with the Mennonite church, so you'll have to tell me a little bit more about it, but I think that's wonderful because, art should play a role in our worship. I think that since the Protestant Reformation, which I am in a Reformed Presbyterian church, so I'm, not too critical of it, but I think we've been afraid of the visual image in, our area in our settings of worship.
Huh.
And, I think that that is something that is lacking and missing. And I love it when churches can incorporate that back into, the sermon or the worship or, just I do love a beautiful sanctuary. Like I know different traditions might have a more simplistic or plainer sanctuary to a more elaborate. But yeah, I think the visual is important. It's how God created us. He obviously surrounds us with beauty and, speaks to us through it. So I think that that's a good thing. But yeah, you'll have to, yeah, tell me. I'm just curious, real quick, a little bit more about the Mennonite tradition. I know nothing about it.
Well, neither Jacob or I grew up Mennonite. I'll start there, and Jacob, you can take it from there.
Oh, no, that's a great point, Ken. So we should probably defer to Barney because Barney did grow up
Yeah, he's
Mennonite. So
rooted.
That is true. And actually, I just happen to have my backpack nearby. Let me just give you a minute. We'll edit this out in post, I think, as friend Sean would say. And I do actually carry with me because from time to time people do say, "Well, what is it about the Mennonite Church?" And I have this here. What is Anabaptist Christians? But I think that Jacob probably can help us a little bit with history. It started with Menno Simons, who I think was a monk, and he really believed in people being able to read the Bible for themselves. and understand it through their reading and especially talking with others. One thing that's great about the Mennonite Church, I think, that might not be consistent with other churches is usually after the sermon, after the message, there is, like Ken mentioned, there's a time of openness with the microphone. People can share. They can, in a way, challenge what they've heard, reflect on what they've heard openly, and it's completely welcome. And there's a real emphasis on simplicity, on stewardship, especially. I think that's a really big one. And, you know, of in within stewardship of, taking great care of God's creation, really emphasizing that kind of care. And and again, back from the pamphlet I showed about Anabaptist Christians, it goes back to believers' baptism, that once we understand why we want to believe and why we want to choose for Jesus, then that's really a huge foundation of the Mennonite belief. Then making that intentional choice to be a disciple of Jesus in a way. And I don't know, Jacob, how can you build
Yeah.
off of what I've said?
Yeah, just briefly, you did a great job. Thank you, Barney. Just briefly to highlight the aspect that Barney said there about kind of communal discernment around the word, and so that's why these works of art help so effectively because they give an entry point into a discussion, and they help people reflect on the text in light of an artist's interpretation, and then we can observe certain things together and it's in that kind of corporate emphasis, a big emphasis on community and discernment around the word, and that the Anabaptist tradition shines, if you will, like a very
Hmm.
flat sense of community. But other Christian traditions definitely have ways of working at corporate discernment, but that just happens to be in our local context, our culture. So that's why the artwork works so well in that setting.
Mhm.
So
And
That's
Lauren, our services are almost completely lay run. Lay people run it, which, coming from a Lutheran background, that's certainly a radical change in how to do things, and it's been a welcome change for me. It's been a enriching change. I talk about this a lot, I know, Jacob, but there's such a good feeling that way when people are free to express, to cry, to laugh, to and feel nothing about embarrassment.
Hmm.
It's
Hmm.
it's a wonderful
Hmm.
thing. There's also a very big peace element within the
Yeah,
Anabaptist,
of course.
belief
Yeah.
system,
Hmm.
which is being sorely tested right now, and a lot of prayer over that as well, And we do stream, Lauren. You can watch it all happen. Worcester
Yes.
Mennonite Church.
that's great. That's great. I'll have to check it out. But I love the idea of simplicity and peace. It does seem like that's something our culture and world desperately needs right now. I think people are hungry for it. And, I don't know if within the Mennonite church there's been a tradition or a trend, I should say, like, are you familiar with what's going on with about amongst younger generations going to like the Quaker churches or the Orthodox churches? Have you heard of that?
yes, and the Catholic Church as well, right? There's
Yeah.
a increase of people, yeah, becoming catechumens in the Catholic tradition. Yeah.
I think they're just seeking that.
Mm.
I don't know if it's that the quiet, the silence, removal from distractions. I'm not sure what it is that's drawing people to these churches, but it is interesting. Like in Philadelphia, there's a Quaker church where I guess they sit in silence for long periods of time. That church is historic, and as long as I was in Philly, there may have been 10 to 20 people who attended that church. Well, in the last year, I saw an article where suddenly they're having hundreds of young people coming.
Interesting.
And I think they appreciate those moments of like sitting in silence. And I can only imagine it's because our world with our iPhones and is so connected and chaotic. We don't have that anymore. So going to a church service like yours, your Mennonite service, or even I go to a very traditional Presbyterian service with the liturgy, which is not something I necessarily grew up with, or we did not go to a church like that in New Jersey. And I found it surprisingly comforting, and very spiritual.
Yes.
You feel the presence of God in that. So while our world gets more crazy and chaotic, I feel that this is encouraging to see people returning to these,
Mhm.
you know, traditions of faith, basically.
Absolutely. It is very encouraging. Yes, the hunger for transcendence and beauty and connectedness in a way that's within community, not digital connectedness, but relational
Mm, mm,
connectedness. Yeah, and it's neat to see how it takes expression in different Christian environments, but, like, how in all of them that is a common yearning, I think, that we have. That's a good point. Thanks for
Yeah.
bringing that up.
Yeah. No, and you just mentioned, like, it's not digital connectedness. And I was thinking about your church where you said people talk and express and communicate. And that's what people need, right? We need these face to face, even though we're doing this which is wonderful. We're doing this on Zoom. But we do need these face to face interactions. So it's like, yeah, this digital world allows us to do this, which is fabulous and connect. But then, you have your in person services where people can come and speak. So,
very
Mhm.
good.
Maybe we could hand it over to you, Barney,
Yeah.
if that's okay?
Sure.
Yeah. We would very sincerely like to thank Lauren Tilden for giving us some of her time today. Initially, the episode was going to be shorter, and I'm so glad that you stuck it out with us because all that we talked about, even up until now, has been so great and interesting, and so much more that I want to ask about symbolism and whatnot in your paintings. So maybe one day in the future, we can have you on again. And so we would like to thank all of our listeners out there. And again, as Ken showed, we would like to emphasize for anyone who is just listening to the podcast that Lauren Tilden does have a great website. Check it out on your PC, especially so that you can sit and take some time and see a nice big image of Lauren's great works. And we hope that all of you are looking forward to the next episode of the Two World Podcast as much as we are. And so for Ken and Jacob, and again, our guest, Lauren Tilden, I am Barney, and we will see you all again next time.